Little girl returns from death and describes heaven a place beyond imagination. Emergency sirens pierced through the quiet autumn afternoon at St. Mary's Hospital. Through the sliding doors, a small body was rushed in, limp and lifeless. 7-year-old female, possible drowning, no pulse for 10 minutes. The paramedic shouted. Dr. Amanda Reynolds felt her heart sink as she saw the child's pale face. It was Sarah Miller, whose warm smile she remembered from church every Sunday. The trauma room erupted into controlled chaos. Starting compressions pushed one of EPI. The clock ticked mercilessly as the medical team fought against time. Emily Miller, the girl's mother, collapsed into her husband Jack's arms outside, their prayers echoing through the sterile hallways. After 15 minutes of desperate attempts, Dr. Reynolds lowered her head. Time of death. But then something extraordinary happened. As the grieving parents fell to their knees in prayer, Sarah's monitors suddenly sparked to life. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with an otherworldly light. The first words that left her blue-tinged lips stunned everyone in the room. I saw heaven, and it's more beautiful than any words can describe. God has a message for all of us. This was only the beginning of a story that would shake their small town of Riverside to its core, exposing long-buried secrets and testing the limits of faith, justice, and redemption. Before we dive into this incredible story, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from and hit that like button. Your engagement helps share this inspiring message. Sarah Miller was born the only child to Jack and Emily Miller, a family living in the modest outskirts of Riverside, a small industrial town dominated by Thompson manufacturing. At 7 years old, she possessed an extraordinary spirit that seemed to touch everyone she met. With honey blonde hair often tied in uneven pigtails and bright blue eyes that sparkled with curiosity, Sarah had a way of making even the weariest souls smile. Jack Miller worked double shifts at Thompson's factory, operating heavy machinery for barely enough pay to keep their small 2-bedroom house afloat. Despite the exhaustion etched on his weathered face, he never missed Sarah's bedtime stories. His calloused hands would gently hold the worn Bible as they read together every night, his voice soft but firm as he taught her about faith and perseverance. The factory's towering smokestacks were visible from Sarah's bedroom window, a constant reminder of their dependence on Richard Thompson's empire. Emily Miller worked part-time as a cafeteria aide at Riverside Elementary, where Sarah attended 2nd grade. The arrangement allowed her to keep an eye on her daughter while contributing to the family's modest income. A former choir singer, Emily filled their home with hymns as she prepared dinner each evening, her voice carrying hope even when their cupboards ran low. She had a gentle strength about her, developed through years of stretching dollars and saying silent prayers over past due notices. The Millers lived in what locals called Factory Row, a street of identical houses built in the 1950s for Thompson manufacturing workers. Their home, though small, was maintained with pride. Jack's carefully tended garden of tomatoes and peppers lined the walkway, while Emily's hand-sewn curtains brightened every window. Sarah's drawings, mostly of angels in heaven as she imagined it, covered the refrigerator door. At school, Sarah stood out not for her worn second-hand clothes but for her kindness. She shared her lunch with classmates who had none, offered her only pencil to others who needed it, and stood up for younger kids against bullies. Her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, often remarked that Sarah had an old soul and a young body. The child seemed to possess an innate understanding of others' pain and an unusual ability to comfort those in distress. The family's faith was their cornerstone. Every Sunday they occupied the same worn wooden pew at St. Michael's Church, 3rd row from the back, where they'd sat since before Sarah was born. Young Father Hayes, new to the parish, had taken a particular interest in Sarah's spiritual curiosity. Her questions during Sunday school often left him thoughtful, especially when she spoke about guardian angels and God's love for the poor. Despite their hardships, the Millers maintained an unwavering sense of dignity and hope. Jack would often say, "We might not have much, but we have each other and we have God." Sarah inherited this optimistic spirit, though she seemed to understand more than a child her age should about the struggles her parents faced. She never asked for new toys or clothes, sensing the weight of each dollar in her parents' budget. Their lives were modest but filled with small joys: family dinners where they shared their daily stories, Sunday afternoons in the park after church, and quiet evenings on their small porch watching the sunset paint the factory smokestacks in golden hues. Sarah's laughter was the melody that made their simple life feel rich, her presence a reminder that wealth couldn't be measured in dollars alone. What no one could have predicted was how this ordinary family from Factory Row would become the catalyst for extraordinary changes in Riverside, or how their unwavering faith would be tested in ways they never imagined. Sarah's innocent spirit would soon challenge the very foundations of power in their small town, all while revealing truths about heaven and earth that would shake their community to its core. Thompson Manufacturing stood as both savior and shadow over Riverside, its sprawling complex employing nearly half the town's workforce. Richard Thompson, the third-generation owner, maintained his grandfather's iron-fisted management style while projecting a carefully crafted public image of benevolent leadership. His donations to local causes made headlines, but the dangerous working conditions and meager wages rarely made the news. The factory complex included a man-made lake, originally created for cooling systems but now marketed as a community recreation area. In reality, it was poorly maintained, with inadequate fencing and warning signs, its waters occasionally taking on strange colors from chemical runoff. Despite numerous accidents over the years, Thompson's legal team had successfully kept any serious investigations at bay. Michael Carter, a rookie reporter for the Riverside Herald, had been quietly collecting stories about the factory's safety violations. Fresh out of journalism school and burning with idealistic fury, he kept a locked drawer full of testimonies from workers afraid to speak publicly. His editor, deeply indebted to Thompson's advertising dollars, had repeatedly shelved Michael's pitches about investigating the factory's practices. Father Thomas Hayes, at 32, was the youngest priest St. Michael's had ever appointed. His modern approach to ministry often clashed with the church's more conservative elements, particularly when he spoke about social justice. The church received substantial donations from Thompson Manufacturing, creating an unspoken expectation of loyalty that increasingly troubled the young priest's conscience. The town's social hierarchy was clearly defined by one's relationship to the factory. The Thompson Trust, as locals called it, included the factory's management, local politicians, and business owners who benefited from Thompson's patronage. They lived in the affluent heights, overlooking the rest of Riverside. Their children attended private schools, and their lives rarely intersected with Factory Row except during carefully orchestrated charity events. Linda Thompson, Richard's wife, chaired numerous community organizations and had perfected the art of noblesse oblige. Their daughter, Catherine, attended the prestigious Riverside Academy, where the scholarship program for factory workers' children, which accepted one student every 5 years, was named after her. The irony that Sarah Miller had just been rejected from this program was not lost on those who knew both girls were the same age. Beneath the surface of Riverside's apparent prosperity, tension simmered. The town's emergency room had an unspoken protocol for handling factory accidents, categorizing them as domestic incidents or recreational injuries in their reports. Dr. Amanda Reynolds, who had treated numerous such cases, kept her own private records, though she knew speaking out could cost her her position at St. Mary's Hospital. The factory's influence extended into every corner of Riverside life. The annual Thompson Manufacturing Summer Festival was the town's biggest event, carefully orchestrated to reinforce the image of corporate benevolence. Local media, dependent on factory advertising, maintained an unwritten policy of positive coverage only. Even the police department's new cruisers bore the Thompson Manufacturing logo as their proud sponsor. Yet signs of resistance existed for those who knew where to look. A support group for injured workers met secretly in the basement of a local diner. Environmental activists collected water samples from the lake under cover of darkness. And in Father Hayes' confessional, workers shared stories they dared not speak elsewhere, their whispered fears and anger protected by the seal of confession. This was the complex web of power, money, and silence that Sarah Miller's near-death experience would soon disturb. The truth she brought back from heaven would threaten not just Thompson's carefully maintained image, but the entire system that kept Riverside's power structure in place. In this small town where everyone knew their role and played their part, a 7-year-old girl's testimony would soon force everyone to choose sides in a battle between truth and power, faith and fear. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and bright, a perfect autumn Sunday that would forever change Riverside. After church service, several families from Factory Row gathered for a potluck picnic near Thompson's Lake, a rare moment of leisure in their work-worn lives. Sarah Miller, Still wearing her Sunday best, a carefully mended blue dress handed down from a cousin played with other children near the water's edge, while their parents spread blankets on the yellowing grass. The lake's surface gleamed deceptively peaceful in the afternoon sun. Warning signs, faded and partially hidden by overgrown bushes, did little to indicate the dangerous currents beneath. Years of chemical runoff from the factory had created unexpected cold spots and treacherous undertows, facts known to Thompson's management but carefully omitted from public records. Sarah and her best friend Amy Parker were playing their favorite game of heaven and angels inspired by that morning's Sunday school lesson. "The angels are everywhere," Sarah had said, spreading her arms wide like wings. She'd been standing on a partially submerged concrete block, one of many illegally dumped construction materials that littered the lake bottom. Nobody saw the moment the weathered concrete crumbled beneath her feet. The splash barely registered among the picnic sounds until Amy's scream pierced the autumn air. "Sarah." Sarah fell in Jack Miller's head, snapped up from where he'd been helping with the grill. Emily's paper plate of potato salad dropped forgotten to the ground as both parents sprinted toward the water's edge. The peaceful Sunday afternoon exploded into chaos. Jack plunged into the lake without hesitation, but the murky water and unexpected depth disoriented him. Other fathers joined the search, forming a desperate human chain. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Emily's prayers mixed with screams as she paced the shoreline, held back by neighbors from jumping in herself. Someone had called 911, but the closest emergency response station was on the other side of town, near the Heights. Over here, Tom Davidson, a factory mechanic, had spotted a flash of blue fabric in the water. Jack lunged toward the spot, but the undertow nearly pulled him under too. It took 3 men working together to finally reach Sarah and pull her lifeless form from the water. Her blue dress, now dark with lake water, clung to her small body as they laid her on the bank. Emily collapsed beside her daughter, her fingers frantically searching for a pulse while Jack began CPR, his recent factory safety training taking over. "Come on, baby girl, breathe," he begged between compressions. The sound of approaching sirens seemed to take forever to grow closer. Mrs. Anderson, Sarah's teacher who had been at the picnic, held Amy back as the young girl tried to reach her friend, sobbing uncontrollably. When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedics worked with swift efficiency, but their faces grew increasingly grim. How long was she under, they asked. Nobody could be sure. Time had stretched and compressed in the panic. The lake water that came up with their resuscitation efforts had an odd chemical smell that made one of the paramedics pause briefly before continuing his work. As Sarah was loaded into the ambulance, a security guard from Thompson Manufacturing finally appeared, more concerned with shooing the remaining picnickers away from the private property than with the emergency unfolding. He was already on his phone, presumably reporting to management, while families hurriedly packed up their abandoned picnic, the food left untouched. Father Hayes, who had joined the gathering after finishing his parish duties, watched the scene with growing anger. He'd warned the church board about the lake's dangers months ago, after hearing numerous confessions about close calls, but had been quietly advised to focus on spiritual matters. Now, as he offered prayers with the shaken families, he caught Michael Carter's eye. The young reporter had arrived with his camera, documenting everything despite the security guard's attempts to stop him. The picnic site emptied quickly, leaving behind only wet footprints on the shore and a child's abandoned hair ribbon floating on the lake's surface. As the ambulance raced toward St. Mary's Hospital, none of the witnesses could have known that this tragedy would become the catalyst for exposing decades of corporate negligence and corruption. Sarah's fall into Thompson's Lake would set in motion events that would force the town to confront not only its present dangers but also its long-buried secrets. For 15 minutes in the St. Mary's Hospital trauma room, Sarah Miller was clinically dead. The monitors showed no heartbeat, her lungs remained still despite every medical intervention, and Dr. Reynolds was moments away from calling time of death. The trauma team had worked tirelessly, their movements synchronized in the desperate dance of emergency medicine, but even their best efforts seemed futile against the murky lake water that had claimed the child's breath. Emily and Jack Miller clung to each other in the hospital chapel, their clothes still damp from the lake water, their prayers becoming increasingly desperate. Father Hayes knelt beside them, his young voice steady as he led them in prayer, though his own heart ached with the weight of this moment. Outside the chapel, a small crowd of Factory Row families had gathered, their own children held closer, their whispered prayers joining the chorus of hope. Then, at precisely 4:17 p.m., something extraordinary happened. Sarah's heart monitor suddenly sprang to life with a strong, steady rhythm. Color flooded back into her pale cheeks and her eyes opened with a clarity that startled the medical team. But it wasn't just her unexpected revival that would shake the foundations of Riverside, it was what she had to say. "I saw them," Sarah whispered, her voice surprisingly strong. "I saw the others who died in the lake." Her blue eyes held a wisdom that seemed ancient, completely at odds with her 7 years. Dr. Reynolds leaned closer, her professional skepticism warring with what she was witnessing. "They're not angry anymore," Sarah continued. "They just want the truth to be told." The initial medical team witnessed Sarah describe a heaven that defied earthly understanding. She spoke of light that didn't hurt the eyes, of music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, and of a peace that made earthly worries seem distant and small. But beyond these expected elements of a near-death experience, Sarah described something more specific and more troubling for certain members of the Riverside community. She spoke of meeting Johnny Martinez, a factory worker who had drowned in the lake in 1987 and whose death had been officially recorded as a drunk driving accident. She knew details about his last moments that had never been made public. She mentioned Lisa Cooper, a teenage girl whose 1995 drowning had been blamed on risky behavior, and recounted the actual events of that day with haunting precision. "God showed me everything," Sarah explained to her astonished parents when they were finally allowed to see her. "He said the lake holds secrets that need to be told. The angels are crying for justice." She described meeting Jesus himself, who had held her hand and shown her visions of the lake's history, decades of dumped chemicals, covered-up accidents, and silenced victims. The medical staff found themselves torn between professional objectivity and the undeniable impact of Sarah's words. How could a 7-year-old know these details? How could she name victims from before her birth and describe their personal effects that had never been mentioned in news reports? Dr. Reynolds found herself secretly documenting every word, knowing that what she was witnessing transcended medical explanation. As news of Sarah's revival spread through the hospital, something shifted in the atmosphere of Riverside. The girl who had returned from death spoke with a gentle authority that couldn't be dismissed. She described a heaven where earthly hierarchies meant nothing, where the truth was as clear as the divine light that filled every corner, and where God's justice waited patiently but inexorably for its moment. Those who entered her hospital room found themselves facing an innocent child who somehow carried the weight of divine witness. When she spoke of her experience, it wasn't with the simple vocabulary of a second grader, but with the profound simplicity of eternal truths. "God's love is bigger than fear," she would say, fixing visitors with those transformed blue eyes. "And His truth is stronger than any lie." As that first evening fell over Riverside, Sarah's hospital room became an unexpected sanctuary. The medical monitors beeped steadily, confirming her miraculous recovery, while her quiet voice continued sharing visions of both heaven's glory and earth's hidden sins. Outside her window, the lights of Thompson Manufacturing flickered in the distance, its secrets suddenly less secure in the face of this most unexpected witness. If this story has touched your heart so far, we'd greatly appreciate a like to help share Sarah's powerful message with others who need to hear it. Let's continue with her extraordinary journey. The news of Sarah Miller's near-death experience and miraculous recovery spread through Riverside like wildfire, igniting a firestorm of reactions that quickly divided the community. Within days, two distinct narratives emerged, one of a divine miracle carrying urgent messages of justice, and another dismissing it as the confused hallucinations of a traumatized child. The Riverside Herald published a carefully sanitized version of events, focusing on the heartwarming story of community response to a near tragedy. The article, heavily edited by management, mentioned nothing of Sarah's specific revelations about past victims. Richard Thompson was quoted expressing deep concern for the Miller family and announcing plans to review lake safety measures. The same edition carried a full-page Thompson Manufacturing advertisement highlighting their commitment to community safety. However, social media told a different story. Videos of Sarah speaking from her hospital bed, secretly recorded by visitors, began circulating online. Her detailed descriptions of past victims and events she couldn't possibly have known sparked intense discussions. Local Facebook groups became battlegrounds between believers and skeptics, with comment sections filling with heated debates about divine intervention versus childhood imagination. The pressure on the Miller family intensified. Anonymous letters began arriving at their homes, some offering prayers and support, others containing veiled threats about keeping quiet for the good of the community. Jack Miller arrived at work to find his locker vandalized with the word troublemaker spray painted across it. Emily received concerned calls from the school administration about Sarah's continued enrollment in the lunch assistance program. Factory row families found themselves caught in an impossible position. Many had their own stories about the lake's dangers and the factory's negligence, but fear of losing their jobs kept them publicly distant from the Millers. Yet, under cover of darkness, some would leave casseroles on the Millers' porch or slip supportive notes into Emily's purse at church. The religious community also fractured over the issue. The more conservative church members, led by wealthy patron Margaret Wheeler, argued that true miracles wouldn't involve accusations against respected community leaders. They pushed for Father Hayes to publicly denounce what they called dangerous speculation, but the young priest stood firm, his sermons increasingly focusing on biblical themes of justice and truth. St. Michael's Sunday attendance split into clear factions. The early service became the domain of Thompson's supporters, filled with designer clothes and disapproving whispers. The later service drew factory row families, who found strength in Sarah's message about God's concern for the oppressed. The collection plate told its own story as factory management conspicuously reduced their donations. Local medical professionals faced their own dilemmas. Dr. Reynolds and her team were pressured to release a statement suggesting Sarah's experience could be explained by oxygen deprivation and childhood fantasy. But the doctor couldn't forget the inexplicable accuracy of Sarah's knowledge about past victims, details that matched her own secret records of suspicious accidents. The town's social fabric began to unravel in subtle ways. Longtime friends stopped speaking to each other. Children at Riverside Elementary were told by some parents not to play with Sarah when she returned to school. The annual Thompson Manufacturing Charity Gala saw numerous regretful declines from families who had never missed it before. Richard Thompson maintained a careful public persona of concerned corporate citizen, but his actions told a different story. Factory supervisors began scrutinizing Jack Miller's work with unprecedented attention. Safety inspectors suddenly discovered numerous violations in areas where Miller supporters worked. The message was clear: loyalty to Thompson Manufacturing was expected to outweigh loyalty to truth. Yet Sarah remained remarkably serene in the face of the growing storm. When asked about the controversy by her parents, she would simply smile and repeat what she'd heard in heaven: God's truth is like light, you can close your eyes to it, but it doesn't stop shining. Her childlike faith, unmarred by adult fears and compromises, stood in stark contrast to the complex web of loyalties and betrayals emerging around her. As the first week after Sarah's experience drew to a close, Riverside found itself at a crossroads. The surface calm of the prosperous factory town had been disrupted, revealing deep fractures in its social foundation. The simple faith of a 7-year-old girl had somehow managed to challenge decades of carefully maintained power structures and social hierarchies. Father Thomas Hayes' investigation into Sarah's claims began quietly, driven by both his pastoral duty and a growing sense of moral obligation. After hearing Sarah's detailed descriptions of past victims, he started spending his evenings in the church archives, reviewing decades of funeral records and parish documents. The young priest's late-night research sessions didn't go unnoticed. The church secretary reported his activities to Margaret Wheeler, who in turn informed Richard Thompson. The investigation took an unexpected turn when an elderly parishioner, Martha Sullivan, approached Father Hayes after confession. Her husband had worked as a security guard at Thompson Manufacturing in the 1980s and had kept detailed journals of incidents at the lake. She'd been carrying the burden of this knowledge for years, and Sarah's experience had finally given her the courage to speak. The journals hidden in her attic provided a devastating chronicle of covered-up accidents and environmental violations. Working discreetly with Michael Carter from the Riverside Herald, Father Hayes began connecting the dots. The reporter's drawer of shelved stories suddenly found new relevance when cross-referenced with Martha's journals. Names, dates, and incidents matched Sarah's heavenly encounters with disturbing accuracy. A child who had never heard these stories was somehow giving voice to victims long silenced. The priest's investigation led him to Mary Cooper, mother of Lisa Cooper, one of the victims Sarah had met in heaven. Mary had moved to the next town after her daughter's death, unable to bear the weight of Riverside's whispers about Lisa's reckless behavior. When Father Hayes shared Sarah's account of meeting Lisa, Mary broke down, revealing that her daughter had actually been gathering water samples for a school science project about pollution when she died. Anonymous tips began arriving at the church office, slipped under the door or left in the confession booth. Former factory workers, retired police officers, and family members of victims slowly came forward, each carrying a piece of the puzzle. Father Hayes meticulously documented everything, creating a comprehensive timeline of incidents that the lake had witnessed over the years. Dr. Reynolds, motivated by her own ethical struggles, secretly shared her hospital records with Father Hayes. The pattern was undeniable. Accidents at the lake had been systematically misclassified, victims' families quietly pressured or paid off, and investigations mysteriously closed before reaching any damaging conclusions. The doctor's career might be at risk, but her conscience wouldn't allow her to stay silent any longer. The investigation faced mounting opposition. Father Hayes received a friendly suggestion from the diocese about focusing on more spiritual matters. His church credit card was suddenly declined, and the heating in his modest apartment mysteriously malfunctioned. But each attempt at intimidation only strengthened his resolve to uncover the truth that Sarah's near-death experience had set in motion. The young priest found an unlikely ally in Catherine Thompson, the factory owner's teenage daughter. Troubled by her father's obvious distress and the whispered conversations she'd overheard at home, Catherine began her own research into her family's history. She discovered old photographs in their attic showing the lake before it became contaminated, along with letters from her grandfather expressing regret about choices made in the name of profit. Father Hayes's investigation reached a crucial point when he located Tom Davidson, the mechanic who had helped rescue Sarah. Davidson revealed that the lake's dangerous conditions were an open secret among maintenance workers. The factory had been dumping chemical waste at night for years, creating the unnatural currents and toxic conditions that had claimed so many lives. His testimony provided the technical details needed to understand how the lake had become so deadly. But as evidence mounted, Father Hayes faced a moral dilemma. The truth he was uncovering could potentially destroy the economic foundation of Riverside. Thompson Manufacturing employed thousands, and its collapse would devastate the community. Yet, as he watched Sarah in church each Sunday, her face radiant with the simple certainty of divine truth, he knew that real faith demanded courage in the face of such challenges. As Sarah Miller recovered in the hospital, her revelations became increasingly detailed and profound, painting a picture of heaven that intertwined divine glory with earthly justice. Each visitor to her room found themselves drawn into an experience that transcended mere childhood imagination. The small girl with knowing eyes spoke of things that shook the foundations of their understanding, both of heaven and of their own community. In heaven, Sarah would explain, her voice carrying a gentle authority. Everyone's story is known and honored. She described meeting Johnny Martinez, the factory worker from 1987, who showed her how the chemical dumping had created deadly whirlpools beneath the lake's surface. "He's not angry anymore," she said, "but he wants his children to know he wasn't drinking that night. He was trying to stop them from dumping the bad water." Lisa Cooper's spirit, Sarah revealed, spent time teaching her about the lake's history. "She showed me how the water used to be clean and blue, full of fish and safe for swimming. She says the truth is like those fish, you can't see them now, but they're still there, waiting to come back." The teenager's scientific observations, recorded in a notebook lost the day she died, had documented the lake's degradation over time. More spirits emerged in Sarah's accounts. Maria Rodriguez, a cleaning staff member who had disappeared in 1992, had witnessed late-night chemical disposals. Thomas Bennett, a quality control inspector from 2001, had tried to report safety violations before his accidental drowning. Each spirit shared their piece of the story, forming a comprehensive picture of decades of corporate negligence and covered-up crimes. But Sarah's heavenly encounters weren't just about exposing wrongdoing. She spoke of experiencing God's overwhelming love and forgiveness, even for those who had caused harm. "Jesus showed me Mr. Thompson's heart," she said one evening, surprising her parents. "It's not all dark. There's still a bright spot where he remembers being a little boy playing by the clean lake with his dad. That's the part of him that can still change." The young girl's descriptions of heaven itself were remarkably consistent and vivid. She spoke of colors that didn't exist on earth, of music that felt like pure love, and of a peace that made earthly troubles seem small but not unimportant. God cares about everything, she insisted. Every tear, every lie, every hurt, but also every smile, every kind word, every brave choice. During quiet moments in her hospital room, Sarah would draw pictures of what she'd seen. The drawings showed the lake's transformation over decades, details that matched historical photographs later discovered in town archives. She drew the faces of victims with uncanny accuracy, capturing details that their families confirmed but had never been publicly shared. Perhaps most remarkably, Sarah began predicting events around the lake. She warned about weak spots in the containment system that would fail during the next heavy rain. When maintenance workers investigated, they found exactly what she had described. She knew where evidence had been hidden: documents buried in waterproof containers, security footage stored in forgotten archive rooms. The medical staff found themselves unable to explain Sarah's knowledge through any conventional means. Brain scans showed normal activity, and psychological evaluations revealed a healthy, well-adjusted child. Yet she spoke with insight that seemed to come from beyond herself, especially when discussing the spiritual implications of what she'd learned. God showed me that healing can't happen without truth, she told Dr. Reynolds during a checkup. It's like when you clean a cut, it hurts at first, but it has to be cleaned to get better. This simple wisdom began to resonate throughout the community, especially among those who had carried secrets for years. Sarah's most profound revelations came during the quiet hours of night, when the hospital corridor lights dimmed and the usual bustle subsided. She spoke of a divine justice that transcended human courts and corporate power, yet worked through human choices and actions. The angels told me that God's time is different from ours, she explained to her father one night. Sometimes it takes years for the truth to come out, but it always does. The impact of Sarah's revelations extended beyond the spiritual realm. She provided specific details about chemical compounds dumped in the lake, information that would later be verified by environmental testing. She knew about hidden drainage pipes, unauthorized modifications to safety systems, and the names of witnesses who had been paid to stay quiet. Each revelation was delivered not with judgment, but with a child's simple desire for things to be made right. Heaven isn't just a place you go when you die, Sarah would often say. It's like a light that wants to shine into all the dark places here. And everyone has to choose: do they want to help the light shine, or do they want to keep hiding in the dark? This perspective began to challenge the comfortable assumptions of many Riverside residents, forcing them to confront their own roles in maintaining the town's secrets. The escalating tensions in Riverside manifested in increasingly visible ways as Sarah's revelations continued to ripple through the community. The first signs appeared at Riverside Elementary, where Sarah's empty desk became a symbol of division. Some parents demanded their children be moved away from her assigned seat when she returned, while others fought to have their children placed closer, believing in the blessing of her presence. Thompson Manufacturing's influence began wielding its power more openly. Longtime workers who had shown support for the Millers found themselves assigned to less desirable shifts. Safety inspections intensified in departments where Jack Miller's friends worked, while known Thompson loyalists received unprecedented flexibility in their schedules. The message was clear: choose your side carefully. Emily Miller's position at the school cafeteria became increasingly uncomfortable. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker, ranging from scripture quotes about false prophets to veiled threats about accident-prone children. The cafeteria supervisor, whose brother was a Thompson Manufacturing manager, suddenly found fault with Emily's work performance, documenting minor infractions that had been overlooked for years. The local business community split along invisible but rigid lines. Shops owned by Thompson supporters displayed their allegiance with prominent Proud Thompson Manufacturing partner signs. Those sympathetic to the Millers faced mysterious delivery delays, tax audits, and canceled contracts. Pete's Diner, which had secretly hosted meetings of concerned workers, saw its health inspection score plummet after an unscheduled visit. Father Hayes's congregation continued to fragment. The early Sunday service became known as the Thompson service, filled with the town's elite. The later service, dubbed the Truth Service by Factory Row residents, saw increasing attendance despite growing pressure. The church board, heavily influenced by Thompson donations, began discussing the possibility of transferring the young priest to another parish. Michael Carter faced his own battles at the Riverside Herald. His carefully researched articles were repeatedly shelved, and he was assigned to cover school board meetings and local garden shows instead. Yet he continued gathering evidence, building a network of sources who would meet him in the early hours before dawn, sharing documents and testimonies that corroborated Sarah's revelations. The divide affected even the youngest members of the community. Children at school began playing Thompson kids versus Miller kids at recess, a game that often ended in tears and visits to the principal's office. Birthday party invitations became political statements, and play dates were arranged or canceled based on family allegiances. Dr. Reynolds found her hospital privileges under review, with questions raised about her professional judgment in handling Sarah's case. The hospital board, which included several Thompson Manufacturing executives, suggested she take a voluntary leave of absence to avoid further scrutiny. Yet she continued documenting everything, building a medical case file that would be impossible to dismiss. The environmental impact of the lake became impossible to ignore. Dead fish began surfacing after heavy rains, exactly as Sarah had predicted. Still, Thompson's PR machine worked overtime, blaming agricultural runoff from farms upstream. When independent environmental testing crews arrived, they found their equipment mysteriously damaged and their hotel reservations unexpectedly canceled. Catherine Thompson's position grew increasingly precarious. Her attempts to discuss the situation with her father were met with uncharacteristic anger. She found herself torn between family loyalty and mounting evidence of wrongdoing. Her mother's increased anxiety medication consumption and her father's late-night pacing revealed the strain beneath their perfectly maintained facade. The town's annual festivals and celebrations became battlegrounds of subtle warfare. The Thompson Manufacturing Summer Festival saw historically low attendance from Factory Row families, while a hastily organized community truth and reconciliation picnic drew hundreds, despite being excluded from coverage in the local paper. As tensions mounted, small acts of kindness and resistance emerged from unexpected quarters. Anonymous donors paid the Millers' utilities when their services were mysteriously interrupted. A group of retired teachers established a secret tutoring network for children whose families faced retaliation. The owner of a small printing press began producing an underground newsletter sharing the stories Sarah had revealed. The conflict reached beyond Riverside's borders as national media began picking up elements of the story. Thompson Manufacturing stock price fluctuated as investment forums debated the implications of potential environmental investigations. Corporate headquarters sent crisis management teams, their presence in expensive suits and luxury cars adding to the town's atmosphere of surveillance and control. The carefully constructed facade of Thompson Manufacturing began to crumble on a rainy Tuesday morning when Catherine Thompson decided to visit the lake alone. Following a detailed map drawn from Sarah's descriptions, she discovered a hidden drainage pipe exactly where the young girl had said it would be. As she stood there, her designer boots sinking into the toxic mud, her phone captured irrefutable evidence of chemical waste still seeping into the water. Catherine's hands trembled as she drove straight to Father Hayes's office, clutching a USB drive containing not only her morning's discovery but also years of her father's private correspondence she'd copied from his home office. Sarah was right about everything she whispered, her voice breaking. Even the things Daddy thought no one else knew about the documents revealed a systematic cover-up spanning 3 generations of Thompson leadership. Meanwhile, Michael Carter's persistent investigation finally bore fruit when a former Thompson Manufacturing board member, dying of cancer, decided to clear his conscience. The extensive documentation he provided included board meeting minutes, internal memos, and a list of payoffs to local officials spanning decades. Most damning were the detailed reports of water quality tests that had been altered before submission to environmental agencies. The revelation that shook Riverside to its core came when Dr. Reynolds received an unmarked envelope containing medical records from a private clinic in Switzerland. These records showed that Richard Thompson's own father had sought treatment for guilt-induced depression in the 1990s, specifically mentioning the lake's victims in his psychiatric evaluations. His detailed confessions to his psychiatrist matched Sarah's accounts with chilling accuracy. The dominoes began to fall in rapid succession. A retired security guard, inspired by Sarah's courage, came forward with a hidden camera video from 1989 showing nighttime chemical dumping. Former employees, freed from their non-disclosure agreements by evidence of corporate fraud, began sharing their stories. Each new revelation aligned perfectly with the details Sarah had described from her heavenly encounters. The turning point came during a routine safety drill at Riverside Academy. Catherine Thompson, participating in a water safety demonstration at the school pool, suddenly found herself struggling against an unexpected current. The incident, though brief and quickly controlled, left the teenager shaken and gave her a terrifying glimpse of what victims at the lake had experienced. That evening she confronted her father with tears streaming down her face. How many children have to be hurt before it stops? Local law enforcement, under increasing pressure from state authorities, could no longer maintain their selective blindness. The Sheriff's Department launched an official investigation, focusing particularly on the mysterious disappearance of environmental inspection records from county archives. Deputies who had previously ignored complaints about the lake began coming forward with their own stories of being pressured to look the other way. The corporate cover-up's exposure accelerated when a junior executive, troubled by his role in maintaining the deception, attempted suicide. His detailed suicide note, though thankfully never completed, found its way to both Father Hayes and Michael Carter. It contained account numbers, dates, and names that provided the final pieces of the puzzle Sarah had been trying to help them solve. Richard Thompson's carefully maintained public image crumbled during a live television interview meant to reassure investors. When confronted with evidence that matched his daughter's pool incident with similar patterns at the lake, he visibly broke down. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," he stuttered, his corporate polish cracking. "I was just trying to protect what my grandfather built." The most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source, Linda Thompson herself. After finding her husband burning documents in their home office late one night, she finally accessed the family records she'd been afraid to examine for years. The truth she discovered about her own family's wealth being built on covered-up deaths and environmental destruction left her no choice but to act. The exposure culminated in a dramatic scene at St. Michael's Church, where Linda Thompson stood up during Sunday service clutching a leather-bound journal. "Sarah Miller," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary, "spoke God's truth while we lived with devil's lies." She proceeded to read entries from her father-in-law's personal diary, confirming every detail of Sarah's heavenly revelations. The awakening of Riverside's conscience began like a slow-moving wave, gathering momentum as each new revelation broke upon the shore of public consciousness. The Sunday after Linda Thompson's dramatic church confession, both services at St. Michael's overflowed with attendees, the artificial division between early and late services dissolving as people sought answers and solidarity. Factory workers who had maintained decades of fearful silence began speaking openly about their experiences. In tearful gatherings at Pete's Diner, they shared stories of close calls at the lake, of colleagues who had disappeared after raising concerns, and of the weight they'd carried in their hearts while staying quiet to protect their families' livelihoods. But their collective testimony painted a picture of systematic intimidation that could no longer be ignored. The transformation of public opinion crystallized during a town hall meeting that had been intended to discuss the annual Thompson Manufacturing Summer Festival. Instead, it became a spontaneous forum for truth-telling. One by one, community members stood to speak: teachers who had noticed patterns of illness in children living near the lake, nurses who had treated suspicious injuries, small business owners who had been pressured into silence through economic threats. The Riverside Herald, freed from its corporate chains by national media attention, published Michael Carter's complete investigation under the headline "A Child's Truth, Heaven's Light Exposes Decades of Darkness." The article went viral, drawing environmental activists, religious leaders, and investigative journalists to the small town. Each new investigation confirmed the accuracy of Sarah's revelations. Sarah's return to school became a catalyst for broader healing. Her classmates, rather than shunning her as some parents had feared, treated her with a mixture of awe and protective care. The children's natural acceptance of her experience helped many adults overcome their skepticism. When she led her class in a prayer for Mr. Thompson's sad heart during morning assembly, even the most hardened critics found their resistance melting. Local businesses began removing their "Proud Thompson Manufacturing Partner" signs, replacing them with "Proud Supporter of Truth and Justice" banners. The change wasn't just symbolic. Shop owners openly defied economic pressure, creating a network of mutual support to protect each other from retaliation. Pete's Diner saw its business triple as it became known as the place where truth is served daily. The environmental impact of the revelation sparked a community-wide response. Volunteer groups formed to monitor water quality, document wildlife impacts, and begin preliminary cleanup efforts around the lake's shores. When Thompson Manufacturing security guards attempted to block access to testing sites, hundreds of residents showed up to form a peaceful human chain, led by Catherine Thompson herself. Churches across Riverside united in an unprecedented show of solidarity. Different denominations held joint services focusing on themes of truth, justice, and redemption. Father Hayes' sermons were now broadcast live on local radio, his messages of corporate responsibility and spiritual accountability reaching beyond his own congregation to touch the wider community. The transformation reached into unexpected corners of Riverside life. High school students organized a Truth in Science fair, presenting projects about environmental impact and corporate responsibility. The local theater group staged a powerful production about the lake's history, incorporating testimonies from family members of victims. Even the annual Christmas parade took on new meaning, with floats celebrating themes of light overcoming darkness. Perhaps most significantly, the awakening crossed socioeconomic lines that had long divided the town. Residents of the Heights began attending community meetings in Factory Row, hearing firsthand stories of their neighbors' struggles. Professionals who had benefited from Thompson's patronage now offered their skills pro bono to help document damages and plan restoration efforts. Medical professionals at St. Mary's Hospital, emboldened by Dr. Reynolds' example, began compiling a comprehensive health impact study. Their preliminary findings suggested patterns of illness in the community that corresponded directly with the lake's contamination timeline. The hospital board, under mounting public pressure, reversed its position and fully supported the investigation. The community's awakening culminated in a candlelight vigil around Thompson's Lake, attended by nearly every resident of Riverside. As thousands of lights reflected off the water's surface, Sarah Miller's clear voice rose above the crowd, singing an old hymn about truth and redemption. The simple faith of a child had sparked a revolution of conscience that would forever change their town. As we journey together through this powerful story of faith, truth, and redemption, we invite you to become part of our community by subscribing to this channel. Your subscription helps us share more inspiring stories that can touch hearts and transform lives. Every subscriber matters in spreading these important messages. The awakening of Riverside's conscience came at a devastating personal cost to those at the center of the storm. The Miller family, despite the growing support from the community, faced increasingly severe repercussions for their role in exposing the truth. Jack Miller was abruptly terminated from his position at Thompson Manufacturing, the official reason citing violation of confidentiality agreements he'd signed years ago. The loss of their primary income sent the family into immediate financial crisis. Emily Miller found herself struggling with severe anxiety attacks, triggered by anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night and strange cars parking outside their home for hours. The stress began affecting her health, leading to hospitalization for exhaustion. The medical bills mounted, adding to their growing financial burden. Their modest savings, already strained by Sarah's hospital stay, quickly dwindled to nothing. Sarah, though maintaining her serene demeanor, showed signs of the toll it was taking. Her teachers noticed she would sometimes stare out the window for long periods, touching the cross necklace her father had given her. During recess, she often sat alone, drawing pictures of the people she'd met in heaven while other children played. Despite her remarkable spiritual experiences, she was still a 7-year-old child bearing an extraordinary burden. The family's home, once a haven of warmth and security, became a source of constant worry. Their mortgage payments, previously manageable on Jack's factory salary, became increasingly difficult to meet. The bank, which had long held ties to Thompson Manufacturing, seemed surprisingly inflexible about payment arrangements. The threat of foreclosure loomed over them like a dark cloud. Father Hayes paid a personal price for his support of the Millers and his pursuit of truth. The diocese, under pressure from wealthy donors, placed him under review. His modest stipend was temporarily suspended, forcing him to rely on the quiet generosity of parishioners who slipped groceries into his car when he wasn't looking. His once promising career in the church seemed to be crumbling around him. Dr. Reynolds faced professional isolation at St. Mary's Hospital. Colleagues who had once sought her advice now avoided eye contact in the hallways. Her research privileges were revoked and her patient load was gradually reduced. The message was clear: her career in Riverside was effectively over, unless she publicly discredited Sarah's experience as a simple case of oxygen deprivation. Michael Carter's pursuit of the story cost him his relationship with his fiancée, whose father was a Thompson manufacturing executive. She returned his ring with a note saying she couldn't marry someone who would destroy everything our families have built. His apartment was broken into twice, his research files rifled through, though nothing was stolen. The weight of these personal sacrifices began to show in quiet moments. Jack would sit in their darkened living room late at night, holding his daughter's medical bills and weeping silently. Emily started having nightmares about the lake, waking up gasping for breath. Sarah would sometimes ask, in her child's voice that seemed too wise for her years, "Daddy, did I do something wrong by telling the truth?" Yet even as their personal worlds crumbled, each of them found strength in unexpected places. When the Millers' refrigerator broke down, an anonymous donor had a new one delivered the next day. When Father Hayes' car wouldn't start, a mechanically inclined parishioner fixed it for free. When Dr. Reynolds found all her shifts canceled 1 week, private practices in neighboring towns offered her temporary work. Richard Thompson's carefully constructed world began to unravel in the privacy of his mansion overlooking Riverside. The man who had always prided himself on control found himself pacing the halls at night, haunted by Sarah Miller's revelations and his own growing crisis of conscience. The weight of 3 generations of secrets pressed down on him like a physical burden. His relationship with Catherine, once his pride and joy, deteriorated as his daughter openly challenged his decisions. During family dinners, she would quote Sarah's descriptions of heaven, watching her father's hands shake as he gripped his fork. When Catherine nearly drowned in the school pool, the terror in her eyes mirrored the same fear he'd seen in workplace accident reports he'd helped bury over the years. Linda Thompson's increasing dependence on anti-anxiety medication became impossible to ignore. He would find her sitting in their garden, staring at the distant factory smokestacks with tears streaming down her face. The discovery of her father-in-law's journals had shattered her belief in the family legacy she'd married into. Her social circle, once filled with charity events and garden parties, shrank as she withdrew from community appearances. At the office, Thompson found himself unable to focus on routine tasks. Every signature on a document reminded him of previous cover-ups. The corporate awards lining his walls seemed to mock him. During board meetings, he caught himself studying the faces of his executives, wondering how many of them shared the burden of knowing what lay beneath the lake's surface. The turning point came when he discovered an old photograph in his father's study, a picture of himself as a child, swimming in the lake with his grandfather. The joy in that young boy's face stood in stark contrast to the man he'd become. That night, alone in his study, he poured himself a drink and began writing a letter to Sarah Miller, though he knew he'd never send it. "You saw through heaven's eyes what I've been trying not to see my whole life." His dreams became filled with faces from Sarah's revelations: Johnny Martinez, Lisa Cooper, Maria Rodriguez, people he'd never met but whose stories he'd helped suppress. The simple faith of a 7-year-old girl had accomplished what years of corporate investigations and legal threats couldn't. It had cracked the protective shell around Richard Thompson's conscience. The corporate mechanisms he'd always relied on seemed to be failing him. His usual tactics of financial pressure and subtle threats felt hollow, especially after Catherine caught him attempting to arrange another cover-up. Is this what great-grandfather built the company for? She had demanded, her young face fierce with disappointment. To poison people and then lie about it. In his private moments, Thompson found himself drawn to the family chapel, unused for years. Sitting in the dusty pews, he wrestled with questions of legacy, responsibility, and redemption. The empire his grandfather had built, which he had protected at all costs, now seemed built on a foundation of lies that even his own daughter refused to accept. The turning point in Riverside's struggle came on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday morning when Sarah Miller experienced another vision during her morning prayers at school. This time, the entire class witnessed her transformation, her face illuminated with an otherworldly light as she spoke with a clarity that silenced even the most skeptical observers. "God is giving Mr. Thompson one more chance," she announced, her voice carrying an authority that belied her 7 years. There are more secrets in the lake, and he wants them found before the spring rains come. She proceeded to describe with precise detail 3 specific locations where crucial evidence had been hidden decades ago by Thompson's grandfather. The timing proved miraculous. Environmental investigators, who had been stalled by lack of concrete evidence, found exactly what Sarah had described: waterproof containers holding original water testing reports, unaltered safety violations, and most damning of all, a personal ledger documenting payoffs to local officials spanning 3 decades. Each document had been preserved perfectly, protected from the lake's corrosive waters. Catherine Thompson, who had been secretly documenting her father's increasing distress, received her own form of divine intervention. While organizing old family videos, she discovered footage of her grandfather on his deathbed, confessing his regrets about the lake to a young Richard Thompson. The video revealed not just evidence of corporate crimes, but also the emotional burden that had been passed down through generations of Thompsons. The most dramatic intervention came during a severe storm that hit Riverside unexpectedly. Lightning struck the lake in exactly the spot Sarah had warned about, causing a surge that exposed a hidden drainage system. The timing coincided perfectly with a surprise environmental inspection, leaving no opportunity for Thompson Manufacturing to hide or explain away the evidence of ongoing chemical dumping. Father Hayes, who had been praying for guidance in helping both the victims and the Thompson family find peace, received an unexpected visitor, a retired priest who had served in Riverside during the first lake accidents. The elderly clergyman provided sealed confession records with names redacted that corroborated every detail of Sarah's heavenly encounters, including conversations that had taken place in the confessional decades ago. Dr. Reynolds, struggling with whether to release her complete medical findings, witnessed an inexplicable phenomenon in Sarah's latest brain scans. The images showed patterns that leading neurologists called unprecedented, suggesting activity that couldn't be explained by current medical understanding. These findings provided scientific documentation of Sarah's unique connection to the divine, validating her experiences in the medical community. The most powerful intervention touched Richard Thompson himself. One night, alone in his study, he experienced what he would later describe as a visitation. Though he never shared the complete details, he emerged from that night transformed, his face bearing the same peaceful certainty that characterized Sarah's. The next morning he walked directly to the Millers' modest home, knelt on their porch, and asked for forgiveness. The sequence of revelations and evidence appeared too perfectly timed to be coincidental. Even the most hardened skeptics in Riverside found themselves reconsidering their positions as one divine intervention after another removed every possible excuse for denial. The truth emerged not through human effort alone, but through what many came to recognize as God's direct intervention in their community. These events culminated in a moment that would be remembered in Riverside for generations to come. During a packed church service, Sarah suddenly stood and walked to the altar. With simple words that carried immense power, she delivered a message of both warning and hope. God says the healing can begin now, but only if everyone chooses truth over fear. Every secret must come to light. Richard Thompson's path to redemption began with that humble moment on the Millers' porch, but it was only the beginning of a profound transformation that would reshape both his life and Riverside itself. His public confession, delivered in the factory's main assembly hall with both shifts present, laid bare not just corporate crimes but the personal toll of carrying such secrets. "I've lived in a prison of my own making," he declared, his voice trembling but clear. "Sarah Miller didn't just see heaven, she saw into the darkness we created and showed us a way out." He proceeded to outline a comprehensive plan for accountability and restitution that went far beyond what any court might have demanded. Thompson's first act of redemption was to establish a substantial trust fund for the families of all lake victims, backdated to include every incident since the factory's founding. He opened the company's private archives, providing investigators with unlimited access to documents that revealed the full scope of past cover-ups. More significantly, he insisted on being the first to testify when criminal investigations began. The transformation of Thompson Manufacturing became his personal mission. He hired leading environmental experts to design a complete cleanup of the lake and surrounding grounds. When shareholders protested the cost, he announced he would sell his family's art collection and multiple properties to fund the restoration personally, Catherine worked alongside her father, bringing fresh insight and youthful idealism to the company's reformation. Linda Thompson found her own path to redemption alongside her husband. She opened the family mansion for weekly support group meetings where victims' families could share their stories. The gardens where she had once hosted exclusive social gatherings became a place of healing and reconciliation. She worked particularly closely with Emily Miller, forming an unlikely but genuine friendship. The most touching aspect of Thompson's redemption came in his relationship with Sarah. He asked her to be part of the Lake Restoration Planning Committee, valuing her insights with the same seriousness he gave to environmental experts. Their walks around the lake property, the elderly businessman listening intently to the young girl's suggestions, became a common sight in Riverside. Thompson's corporate reformation extended beyond environmental concerns. He implemented the highest safety standards in the industry, raised wages substantially, and established a worker representation program that became a model for other companies. Most importantly, he created a corporate ethics office with real power, headed by Michael Carter, the very reporter who had helped expose the scandal. The cost of redemption was high. Thompson lost business partners, social standing, and a significant portion of his wealth. Yet those who knew him noted that he seemed more at peace than ever before. "Sarah was right about the bright spot in my heart," he confided to Father Hayes. "God didn't just want to expose our sins, He wanted to show us how to make things right." This personal transformation had a ripple effect throughout Riverside's business community. Other companies, inspired or pressured by Thompson's example, began examining their own practices. The town's economic foundation shifted from one built on secrets and exploitation to one centered on transparency and ethical business practices. Riverside's transformation over the following year became a testament to the power of truth and redemption. The once polluted lake, after extensive cleanup efforts, gradually returned to its natural state. Fish began returning to its waters, and families could once again safely gather along its shores. The site that had held so many dark secrets became a symbol of the community's healing. Thompson Manufacturing underwent a complete metamorphosis. Under the new joint leadership of Richard Thompson and his daughter Catherine, the factory became a model of corporate responsibility. The installation of state-of-the-art safety systems and environmental protections went far beyond legal requirements. Workers who had once feared for their jobs now took pride in being part of what they called the miracle at Riverside. The Miller family's story became intertwined with the town's renewal. Jack Miller was reinstated at the factory with a promotion to head of workplace safety, his experience and integrity now viewed as valuable assets. Emily Miller worked with Linda Thompson to establish a foundation supporting families affected by corporate environmental disasters nationwide. Their modest home on Factory Row became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking hope and healing. Father Hayes's congregation grew beyond the physical capacity of St. Michael's Church, requiring services to be held in the park during summer months. The artificial divisions between early and late services disappeared entirely, replaced by a genuine fellowship that crossed all social boundaries. His sermons about corporate responsibility and spiritual accountability were now broadcast nationally, making Riverside a model for faith-based social justice. The town's economic structure shifted dramatically. New businesses emerged, focused on environmental restoration and sustainable manufacturing. The old hierarchy based on loyalty to Thompson Manufacturing evolved into a more equitable community where success was measured by ethical practices rather than political connections. Pete's Diner, once a secret meeting place for worried workers, became a celebrated local landmark. Education in Riverside underwent its own revolution. The school curriculum now included environmental science programs that used the lake's restoration as a living laboratory. The Thompson Scholarship Program was reformed and expanded, now offering opportunities based on merit and need rather than family connections. Sarah's class took a special interest in monitoring the lake's recovery, turning their science projects into real environmental research. The annual Thompson Manufacturing Summer Festival was replaced by the Riverside Truth and Reconciliation Celebration, an event that combined commemoration of past victims with celebration of the town's transformation. The highlight each year was the candlelight vigil around the lake, where Sarah would lead the community in prayers for continued healing and guidance. The media narrative about Riverside shifted from scandal to inspiration. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, and corporate ethics researchers studied the town's transformation. Business schools began using the Thompson manufacturing case as a model for corporate redemption. Environmental groups cited the lake's restoration as proof that even the most damaged ecosystems could be healed with sufficient commitment. Most remarkably, the social fabric of Riverside was rewoven into something stronger and more inclusive. Former adversaries found themselves working together on community projects. The artificial boundaries between Factory Row and the Heights dissolved as neighbors recognized their common humanity. The town's shared trauma transformed into shared purpose, creating bonds that transcended old divisions. Children played freely around the lake again, their laughter a testament to the healing that had taken place. The site that had once held so much fear and sadness became a place of joy and renewal. Sarah often sat by the water sharing her story with visitors who came seeking understanding of how a child's vision of heaven had changed an entire community. The spiritual transformation of Riverside extended far beyond the walls of St. Michael's Church. Sarah Miller's near-death experience and its aftermath sparked a profound re-examination of faith, truth, and community that touched every corner of town life. Her simple yet profound message about God's love and justice resonated with people of all beliefs and backgrounds. 10 years after Sarah's experience, she had grown into a remarkable teenager whose quiet wisdom continued to influence the community. Now 17, she still spoke about her heavenly experience with the same clarity and conviction, but with a deeper understanding of its lasting impact. Her presence at community events carried a gentle authority that reminded everyone of the divine intervention that had changed their town. Richard Thompson's spiritual journey became a powerful testimony. The former corporate titan could often be found volunteering at the Lakes Education Center, sharing his story of redemption with visiting business leaders. "God used a child's pure heart to break through my hardened one," he would say, his eyes filled with grateful tears. His transformation inspired other business leaders to consider their own ethical choices. The interfaith dialogue that emerged in Riverside became a model for other communities. The town's various religious leaders, inspired by Sarah's inclusive vision of divine love, found common ground in promoting environmental stewardship and corporate responsibility. Monthly interfaith gatherings at the restored lake became a tradition, celebrating the unity that had emerged from their shared experience of grace. The lake itself acquired a sacred significance that transcended traditional religious boundaries. Environmental scientists worked alongside spiritual leaders to maintain its restoration, creating a unique blend of ecological and spiritual stewardship. Visitors from around the world came to witness what many called the miracle of Riverside, finding inspiration in both the physical restoration and the spiritual renewal it represented. Sarah's story had particular impact on children and young people. Her experience encouraged them to speak their truths without fear, knowing that age was no barrier to divine purpose. The youth programs at various religious institutions flourished, focusing on themes of environmental responsibility, ethical leadership, and spiritual courage. Many young people cited Sarah's example as inspiration for their own advocacy work. The Miller family's faith journey touched many lives. Their unwavering trust in divine purpose, even during their darkest days, demonstrated the practical power of faith in action. Emily Miller's prayer groups evolved into a nationwide network supporting families facing similar corporate environmental battles. Jack Miller's testimony about forgiveness and reconciliation helped heal old wounds in the community. Father Hayes's ministry expanded in unexpected ways. His sermons about corporate ethics and environmental stewardship reached an international audience through social media. He became a sought-after speaker on the integration of faith and social justice, always beginning his talks with Sarah's simple but profound observation that heaven's light wants to shine in every dark place. The most lasting spiritual impact was perhaps the most subtle, a deep understanding that divine truth could speak through the most unexpected messengers. The community learned to listen more carefully to children, to conscience, and to the quiet voice of truth in their own hearts. The rigid religious structures that had once divided them gave way to a more authentic and inclusive spirituality. As Riverside approached the 10th anniversary of Sarah's experience, the transformed lake stood as a testament to both physical and spiritual renewal. The clear waters reflected more than just the sky. They mirrored the hope of a community that had learned the true meaning of faith, redemption, and divine purpose through the heaven-sent wisdom of a child. If this story of faith, redemption, and divine truth has touched your heart, we invite you to join our community by subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories that can transform lives and inspire hope. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends and family who might need this message, and let us know in the comments how this story resonated with you. Would you like to hear part 2 of Sarah's extraordinary journey? Your engagement helps us bring more inspiring content to those who need it most.